for their contribution in terms of broadening what we hope was a general interest.
Prince William thought he was entering a private family discussion. Instead, he walked into a moment that would shake the emotional foundations of the monarchy. Across the table sat Princess Anne, composed but visibly burdened, holding the sealed note Prince Philip had left behind. And when Anne finally revealed what Philip had written about succession, William's expression changed from controlled authority to stunned silence. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William arrived at the Windsor sitting room, expecting talk about duties, engagements, and pressure around the crown. Anne did not greet him warmly. She held a sealed note, a private message closed until a chosen moment, and her hands showed the cost of keeping it. Philip had left those words through a documented account given to Anne, asking her to hold them until William was ready. The crown mattered because it meant authority, keeping the monarchy steady when family emotion threatened to pull it apart. The direct line of succession also mattered because it meant the order through Charles, William, and then his children, the place Philip believed weakness could not be allowed. Anne broke the silence with a voice that almost held. Philip's message urged the monarchy to protect that line by preparing William for decisive authority sooner than expected, while warning against interference from outside the future reign. William did not interrupt her. The prince stared at the paper as if the ink had placed a hand on his shoulder. Anne kept reading, but grief moved through her words, because every sentence forced her to hear Philip again, stern, exact, and impossible to dismiss. The room changed when Anne reached the phrase Philip had underlined. Succession was not merely a legal order, it was a moral responsibility that had to be defended before weakness reached the throne. William set one hand on the table and stopped moving. He looked like a grandson judged by a man he loved, trusted, and feared disappointing. Anne closed the note slowly, studying his face, knowing the revelation had gone deeper than support. It had become a burden. William finally asked why Philip had written it that way. Anne did not soften the answer. She said he had watched palace voices growing too confident, near decisions they were never meant to shape. The future king understood the note was not only about him, it was about a danger Philip had seen before anyone named it, and before William could understand the full weight of Philip's warning, Anne had to reveal who the note was truly meant to protect him from. Behind every royal crisis stands a family forced to choose between affection and duty. William heard Philip's words as a command. Anne carried them as a promise. Charles received them as a wound, and Camilla felt their shadow before the note was even spoken aloud. The monarchy was not being challenged by strangers. It was being tested by the people closest to the throne. William remained still, but the silence around him had changed. Moments earlier, the note had belonged to the past. Now it belonged to him. The prince had spent years learning how to wait, how to measure every word, how to carry public pressure without letting it break through his face. Restraint had been his shield. It had kept him calm in storms, steady during family wounds, and careful when the crown demanded patience. But Philip's message cut through that restraint like a command from another age. It forced William to ask whether silence was still strength, or whether silence had become the very weakness his grandfather feared. Anne understood that question before William spoke it. She had carried Philip's private conviction not as a piece of family history, but as a promise made in grief. To her, tradition was never decoration, it was discipline. It was the hard road chosen when easier feelings tempted everyone toward comfort. The sealed note meant more than folded paper. It was a private royal instruction, a message kept outside public view because its power came from trust, not ceremony. Succession meant the order by which the crown passes from one generation to the next, and Philip's warning made that order feel suddenly fragile, not because the law had changed, but because people around it had. Charles entered before the room had recovered. He noticed William's pale expression first, then Anne's closed hand over the note. The king did not demand. He asked quietly. What did he say? No one answered at once. That pause struck him harder than a shouted accusation. Charles understood what silence could mean inside a family trained never to expose too much. He felt Philip's judgment before hearing the words, and the wound was immediate. His father's confidence seemed to rest more heavily on William's future authority than on his own power to steady the present. Camilla sensed it too. She did not need the note read aloud again to feel its edge. The queen consort had long understood that influence in royal life often moved through private access, quiet conversations, and the ability to be present before decisions hardened. But Anne refused to soften Philip's meaning for anyone's comfort, and that refusal unsettled her. The message separated public rank from private trust. It suggested that standing nearest to the throne did not mean guiding the throne's future. Anne finally turned back to William and spoke in a lower voice. Philip had watched the family's internal tensions more closely than anyone knew, she told him, and his silence had never been ignorance. He had seen the smiles, the careful phrases, the pressure hidden beneath polite rooms. He had noticed where loyalty ended and influence began. William looked toward Charles, then back to Anne, realizing that the note had already moved beyond grief. It had become a judgment on the living. Charles felt that truth settle between them. Anne's hesitation had wounded him more deeply than any direct answer, because it suggested the decision had already passed through Philip, through her, and now into William's hands. But the real blow was not what Philip wrote at the end of his life. It was the incident years earlier that convinced him the succession needed protecting. Every sealed note has a beginning. Philip's warning did not appear from nowhere, and Anne knew exactly when it started. It began at a private Windsor dinner, long before the note was opened, when a quiet conversation turned sharp, a chair scraped against polished floor, and Philip realized that the future of the monarchy could not be left to sentiment alone. Anne carried the memory like a bruise that never faded. That dinner had been meant to calm the family, not divide it. Senior voices had gathered behind closed doors to speak about future responsibilities, private duties, and the pressure building around the next chapter of the crown. Windsor mattered because it was not just a royal home. It was where private family feeling often met public responsibility. The crown mattered because every personal choice inside that family could one day echo through the whole monarchy. William had been present, but careful. The prince listened more than he spoke, measuring every word out of respect for Charles. The king, still trying to steady his own place in the family's future, chose caution over confrontation. Camilla watched everything closely, and Anne noticed something that unsettled her. Philip was almost silent. He did not interrupt. He did not soften the air. He studied the room as if every pause was telling him something no one dared say aloud. Camilla finally asked the question that changed everything. She wondered whether William should be given increasing authority over private family decisions before Charles had fully settled into his role. The words sounded controlled, even reasonable, but the meaning struck harder than the tone. To Philip, it was not a discussion about timing, it was a warning sign. The future king's authority was being treated as something that could be delayed, managed, or quietly negotiated. Philip's face hardened. Not because he feared disagreement. He had lived a life surrounded by duty, argument, sacrifice, and discipline. What troubled him was the cost of William's silence. The prince lowered his eyes, refusing to challenge Charles in front of the others, and that restraint looked noble to some. But Philip saw the danger hiding inside it. Later, he told Anne that William's greatest strength could become his greatest weakness if he allowed respect to become surrender. Anne remembered what happened after dinner with painful clarity. Philip asked her to speak with him privately, away from the careful voices and polished phrases. He told her the family had begun confusing emotional comfort with constitutional stability. Constitutional stability meant the steady order that keeps the monarchy functioning beyond personal feeling, and Philip believed that order was being quietly tested. He placed one hand on a side table and said succession had to be protected before anyone could bend it into convenience. Anne never forgot the scrape of Camilla's chair, William's lowered eyes, or Philip's stare across the table as if a line had been crossed forever. That dinner became the hidden spark behind the sealed note, and now the same unresolved tension was about to erupt in front of William. Because once Charles learned what Philip had written, the private warning became a family confrontation no one could contain. Charles did not raise his voice at first. That made the moment more dangerous. He stood opposite Anne, with William caught between grief and duty, and asked why Philip's note had been hidden until now. Anne did not retreat. She looked at her brother with cold sorrow, and made it clear that the note had not been hidden from the crown. It had been protected for the crown. Charles felt the room close around him before anyone answered. No aide stood nearby to soften the words. No private secretary waited to turn pain into careful language. It was only family now, and that made the confrontation sharper. The crown, in this moment, meant more than the throne itself. It meant the burden of keeping royal authority steady when blood, loyalty, and old wounds pulled in different directions. Charles believed Philip's message should have come to him first. Anne believed Philip had chosen timing over comfort, and William stood between them, knowing both could not be right. Anne held the note as if it still carried Philip's weight. She told Charles that their father had left clear instructions through a private documented account. One meant to be opened only when the direct line faced pressure from within. The direct line meant the path of succession through the monarch, the heir, and the heir's children, and Philip had treated that path as something sacred, not something to be shaped by household emotion. Charles gripped the back of a chair before speaking again. The gesture betrayed what his voice refused to admit. He was wounded, deeply. Philip's warning sounded less like guidance and more like judgment. William watched his father struggle and felt the old pull of loyalty. The prince had never wanted this room, this note, or this choice. He respected Charles. He loved the memory of Philip. And now, duty was forcing him to stand in the narrow space between them. Anne did not rescue him from that pain. She knew Philip's words had been written precisely for a moment when affection would try to make silence look noble. But silence, this time, would mean surrender. Charles finally asked the question everyone had been avoiding. He wanted to know whether Camilla had been named. Anne paused. It was not a long pause, but it carried the force of an answer. Then she said, Philip had warned against influence without inheritance. The words struck the room like a verdict. Camilla's name did not need to be spoken twice for everyone to understand the meaning. Public rank could stand close to power, but Philip had drawn a line between closeness and control. William finally spoke. His voice stayed low, but it did not break. He told Charles that he had not asked for the note, had not sought Philip's final confidence, and had not wanted a private message to place him against his father. But he could not ignore what Philip believed about the future of the crown. Charles looked at him then, not as a son seeking approval, but as a future king beginning to accept a burden no one could carry for him. Charles left without touching the note. That refusal said what anger could not. The family had split over Philip's final warning, and William understood that nothing after this would feel simple again. Yet the argument was not simply emotional, because behind Philip's words stood a deeper question of who truly held power over the monarchy's future. Power inside the monarchy is rarely announced with thunder. It moves through signatures, silences, locked drawers, and the people trusted to carry private instructions. Philip understood that better than anyone. His note did not crown William before his time, but it did something almost as powerful. It defined where true confidence should rest when the family's emotions threatened the institution. William remained alone after Charles left, and the silence felt heavier than the argument itself. The note lay near him, close enough to reach, too powerful to touch. Nothing in Philip's message changed the legal order of succession, the formal path by which the crown passes from monarch to heir. But it changed something more dangerous inside the family. It changed the private understanding of who was being prepared, who was trusted, and who could no longer be allowed to drift around the future as if influence carried no cost. William had spent years accepting pressure with patience. Now Philip's words demanded something sharper. Anne watched him from the doorway and said nothing at first. The princess knew the difference between ceremony and command. Ceremony could be endured. Command had to be obeyed. To her, Philip's note was not a sentimental farewell from a grandfather. It was a moral instruction from a man who believed the direct line, meaning the clear route from the current monarch to the next generation, had to be strengthened before private pressure blurred its edges. William needed to be prepared, not protected from discomfort. He needed to be trusted before delay became weakness. William looked down at the folded paper and felt the weight of being seen too clearly. Philip had recognized leadership in him before he had fully accepted it in himself, and that realization shook him more deeply than praise ever could. The prince did not feel victorious. He felt exposed. To be trusted by Philip was not a reward. It was a burden with no escape. Anne understood that burden, and pride mixed with sadness as she watched him wrestle with it. She knew confidence could become an inheritance, and this was one William could never give back. The note carried one warning above all others. Family affection could become dangerous when it gave unofficial voices the confidence to shape official futures. That was the line Philip feared. Not love, not loyalty. Influence without a rightful place. Anne quietly informed a senior private secretary that certain family decisions would now need William's direct consultation. A private secretary meant a trusted royal official who manages sensitive duties, messages, and schedules behind the scenes. With that instruction, Philip's private warning began moving from memory into action. William finally picked up a pen. He paused, as if one word could alter the temperature of the entire palace, then wrote a short instruction across a briefing folder. Direct line matters first. The gesture was calm, but the meaning was bold. It was his first decision under Philip's shadow, and Anne knew the family would feel it, before anyone dared name it. But once that instruction began moving through the palace, Camilla realized the sealed note had become more than memory. It had become policy. And when the first consequences reached the royal household, the quiet warning turned into visible fallout. The first sign of change arrived without ceremony. A private briefing route shifted. A meeting list changed. A familiar name disappeared from a page where it had always appeared. Camilla noticed it before anyone explained it to her, and in that small administrative silence, she understood the truth. Philip's note had reached beyond William's heart and into the machinery of the palace. Camilla read the revised list once, then again, and the absence struck harder the second time. No announcement had been made. No warning had softened the blow. A private succession briefing, meaning a closed discussion about the future order of the crown, and the family members directly tied to it, had been redirected to include William earlier, and more directly than before. That mattered because these meetings shaped who heard sensitive information first, who could influence tone, and who stood near decisions before they became fixed. For years, access had carried quiet power. Now access had become the first place Philip's warning left its mark. Palace staff moved carefully, as if every paper could bruise someone. They understood that Philip's note did not carry legal force, but it carried something almost as powerful inside royal life: emotional authority. A document did not need to rewrite law to change behavior. It only had to make people afraid of crossing the wrong boundary. Anne had made that boundary impossible to ignore. Philip's phrase, "influence without inheritance," was no longer a dramatic warning. It was becoming a rule for who could enter conversations about the future line, and who could not. Camilla closed the meeting folder slowly. The queen consort did not speak at first, because speaking too quickly would reveal how deeply the change humiliated her. She had understood the value of being present in private rooms, of hearing concerns before others heard them, of offering calm before a decision hardened. Now that informal presence had been reduced without open confrontation. That was the cruelty of it. No one had raised a voice. No one had accused her publicly. The page had simply changed, and the silence around that change said everything. Charles felt the pressure from both sides. The king wanted to defend his wife, but Philip's memory stood between them like a command no one dared dismiss. During a morning review of household papers, he turned one page after another and said almost nothing. His quietness worried the staff more than anger would have. Charles knew that fighting the change would make him appear to resist Philip's final judgment. Yet accepting it meant watching Camilla absorb a private defeat in his name. William received the second part of the note later that day, and it struck him with a colder force. Philip had not only warned him about influence near the throne, he had urged him to protect George, Charlotte, and Louis from being pulled into adult rivalries before they were old enough to understand them. The children mattered because they were not symbols in a palace argument. They were the next living branch of the direct line. William read those words and felt fatherhood collide with kingship. Camilla finally asked who approved the change. The answer came softly, but it landed like a door closing. William did, after speaking with Anne. Charles remained visibly strained, caught between love and duty, while the future king realized the note had forced him beyond shock and into action. Because before William could act like the future king, he needed one private moment with Anne to decide what kind of king Philip believed he could become. After the confrontation, after the folder changes, after the first shock had passed through the palace, William asked Anne for one thing: no officials, no advisors, no careful language. Just the truth. They met privately, and for the first time since the note was opened, William stopped reacting to Philip's words and began deciding what he would do with them. William wanted the room emptied because he could no longer bear the weight of polished answers. Every voice around him had turned Philip's note into strategy, memory, warning, and policy, but none of that answered the question pressing hardest inside him. What had Philip truly seen? Not in the monarchy, in him. Anne understood why he asked for privacy. A conversation without officials mattered, because royal households often protect people from the hardest truths, and William no longer wanted protection. He wanted the burden spoken plainly. Anne brought the note again, but this time she did not place it between them like evidence. She held it like a promise. The sealed note had already changed briefing routes and private access, but its deepest meaning had not been administrative. It had been personal. Philip had trusted William because he believed the prince could carry firmness without cruelty and restraint without weakness. That mattered because a future king could not survive by being soft enough to please everyone, yet could not rule well by becoming hard enough to feel nothing. William admitted the truth in a low voice. He was still stunned. Not honored, not flattered, stunned. Philip's faith frightened him because it created a standard he had never asked to inherit. The prince feared failing the man who had shaped so much of the family's idea of service. He feared becoming too cautious and proving Philip right about restraint. He feared becoming too forceful and losing the humanity that had made people trust him. Success stood in front of him, but suffering held it by the throat. Anne softened then, and it changed the entire mood between them. She told William that Philip never expected him to be fearless. The old soldier had never believed fear disappeared from duty. He believed duty began when fear stopped making the decisions. Anne explained that Philip had asked her, through a private recorded conversation near the end of his life, to stand beside William if the note ever forced him into conflict with older loyalties. Her involvement had not been interference. It had been obedience. William looked at Anne differently after that. He saw not a relative pushing him forward, but the keeper of a promise made before grief had closed around the family. Anne placed the note in his hands, and this time he accepted it. He folded it carefully into his jacket pocket instead of leaving it on the table. That small act changed everything. The note no longer belonged to Philip alone, and it no longer rested in Anne's care. William was no longer stunned by the message. He was ready to carry it, and that quiet decision would soon move beyond the private room. And when the world learned that Philip's final words had shifted the balance inside the palace, the private family shock became a national royal drama. By morning, the palace could no longer keep the story contained. The sealed note became the image everyone talked about, not because the public had seen it, but because they understood what it represented. Philip, the old guard of royal discipline, had spoken from beyond the grave, and William, the future king, had been forced to answer. William stepped into public duty, carrying a private storm no crowd could fully see. The prince appeared calm, controlled, and careful. But the pause before his first answer said more than any prepared statement. Royal commentators had already begun framing the note as a defining moment in his preparation for kingship. And that mattered, because public belief can strengthen or weaken a future reign long before the crown is actually worn. The monarchy survives not only through law, but through trust. And Philip's final words had suddenly placed that trust around William, like armor and weight at the same time. Palace officials tried to keep the language controlled. They spoke of family unity, respect for private correspondence, and the deep affection still held for Philip's memory. Private correspondence meant personal messages never meant for public release, and this note carried power because it had crossed from family grief into national meaning. But no official wording could contain the emotional force of the revelation. People were not asking only what Philip had written. They were asking why those words had shaken Charles, steadied Anne, unsettled Camilla, and changed William. William answered questions about unity with measured restraint, yet those watching closely noticed he took longer than usual before speaking. That hesitation mattered, because it showed the conflict had not been erased by public duty. The prince was still carrying the shock, still measuring the pain, still learning how to stand beneath Philip's confidence without letting it crush him. Anne, meanwhile, remained calm and immovable. Her silence became its own statement. She did not defend the note. She did not explain it further. To Anne, Philip had already spoken clearly enough. Then came the phrase that turned the private crisis into a national headline. One broadcaster called it, "Philip's final vote of confidence in William," and the words spread with brutal speed. By afternoon, a newspaper front page carried a solemn image of William beside the headline, "The Note That Changed the Line," with a smaller photograph of Anne beneath it, and the words, "Philip's warning finally revealed." The line was dramatic, but it captured the mood. The country understood that something unseen had shifted. Outside Windsor Castle, a small crowd gathered near the gates. An elderly woman held flowers and told the cameras, "Philip knew what duty meant. If he trusted William, people will listen." That single sentence cut through the noise. It turned the debate from gossip into judgment. Camilla could feel the distance growing. Charles could feel the old pressure tightening. Anne could feel Philip's promise being carried into daylight. William did not weaken under the reaction. He changed inside it. The public response confirmed that the monarchy now saw him through Philip's final judgment. And as the noise settled, one truth remained stronger than every headline. Philip's note had not divided the crown. It had defined who was ready to defend it. In the end, the sealed note was not a weapon. It was a verdict. Philip had looked at the family he served, the crown he protected, and the future he would not live to see. And he left behind a message that cut through affection, fear, and hesitation. William was stunned, because the note did not ask him to wait. It asked him to stand. William understood at last that Philip's warning had never been written to shame Charles or wound the family. It had been written to protect the one thing Philip believed must remain stronger than private pressure: succession. Succession meant the order by which the crown passes from one royal generation to the next. And Philip saw that order as more than law. He saw it as trust. He saw it as stability. He saw it as the thin line between a monarchy guided by duty and a family pulled apart by emotion. Charles carried that truth painfully. The king had been wounded by the note, but reflection began to replace shock. Philip's confidence in William did not erase his own reign. It did not deny his years of service or the burden he had carried. But it did limit something Charles could no longer ignore. Personal loyalties could not be allowed to shape the future line. The monarch could love, defend, forgive, and protect. But even he could not bend tomorrow around comfort without risking the very institution he had sworn to serve. Anne felt the ache of release. For so long, she had guarded Philip's words like a secret flame, knowing they would hurt when finally spoken. The princess had kept faith through silence, through doubt, through the fear that opening the note would fracture what remained of family peace. Yet relief moved through her now, because she had delivered the warning exactly when it mattered. She had not betrayed Charles. She had obeyed Philip, and in doing so, she had moved from keeper of a secret to guardian of his final command. Camilla recognized the boundary without needing it repeated. The queen consort understood that proximity to the monarch was not the same as authority over succession. The note had redrawn invisible lines around influence, access, and private advice. It had made clear that affection could stand beside power, but it could not direct the future of the crown. William stood alone after the family meeting and removed Philip's note from his jacket. The prince read the final line once more, then placed it inside a locked royal file rather than leaving it in Anne's care. That decision was quiet, but decisive. From that moment forward, private discussions involving the direct line would be handled with sharper boundaries and greater protection. And with that final act, the note stopped being a secret and became what Philip intended all along: a boundary around the crown, a burden for William, and a final lesson in royal duty. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.